There are moments that feel like the country changes, and we are in one right now. And I think the Democratic National Convention illustrated that. I don't think it was the catalyst for it, but I think it certainly embodied it. From the time that DJ Cassidy did that roll call with the music and the dancing and Lil Jon coming down the aisles, doing the count for Georgia, it turned democracy into a party, into a celebration.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Heather Cox Richardson, an absolutely brilliant writer and intellect who I've respected for such a long time that I'm feeling incredibly lucky she's decided to join me here today. Heather is a historian, a professor of American history at Boston College, and has previously taught at MIT and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is the author of 7 books on history and politics, and in 2019, she started publishing Letters from an American, which is now one of the most successful Substacks with over 1 million subscribers. Heather says she studies the contrast between image and reality in America, but especially in politics. So I thought, who better to break down the Democratic Convention and where we stand with the 2024 election than with someone who has studied the history of our country and our elections and knows how to explain the difference between spin and truth. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, historian, author, and professor, Heather Cox Richardson. Welcome, Heather.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
Well, thank you for coming. I mean, as I was saying in the introduction, I'm such a big fan of yours. I live here in LA where there are lots of celebrities, but I don't really feel, woo-woo about celebrities. But then I'm a total fangirl of yours because I get these massive brain crushes and you are right at the top of my list.
Well, that's so sweet of you to say. But for me, I feel like I belong in your kitchen. I mean, you're a friend to everybody and you're having really interesting conversations. So the only thing I'm a little surprised by is that it's taken us so freaking long to actually get into the same room.
Heather, I completely agree. It is crazy. I've wanted to talk to you forever, but you are a busy lady. And so I'm really glad that we could do this post-convention because we were both there. We ran into each other for a hot second at a women's luncheon, but we barely had the chance to speak because I was heading out and you were trying to find the food, which for people who don't know is absolutely mandatory at an event like that because you can never eat. There's never time to eat. You're just going from one thing to another to another. So it's this huge, busy event, and you can see people and not see them at the same time.
So what was funny about that was indeed, I was a little bit shocked at how hard it was to find food. I hadn't eaten breakfast because I'd slept. I got very little sleep there. And I figured I would eat at the brunch, but I can't eat eggs. So I get to a brunch and of course everything's got eggs. So I can't even believe I'm telling you.
For people who don't know, there were literally 10 different kinds of egg sandwiches.
Yes. But there was one other thing by the time I got there, and that's what I had that day. The only thing I ate in the middle of the day, I cannot believe I'm saying this in public. I ate chocolate-covered bacon for breakfast and lunch that day. And I said, this is why politicians die young. Yeah. Chocolate-covered bacon? Who even thought of chocolate-covered bacon? Although I have to say, it was pretty good.
I bet it was delicious. I did eat a half of an egg sandwich standing up. I went on my very merry way. But yeah, no, it's really hard to eat at those things. And I don't think people understand. They have these visions of us all sitting at these huge luncheons and nope, we're on the go. So after such an event as that, what are your takeaways from the convention in Chicago? What do you think happened there? And what do you think the Democrats got out of it?
First of all, I was incredibly honored to be there because there are moments that feel like the country changes, and we are in one right now. And I think the Democratic National Convention illustrated that. I don't think it was the catalyst for it, but I think it certainly embodied it. From the time that DJ Cassidy did that roll call with the music and the dancing and the, Lil Jon coming down the aisles, doing the count for Georgia, it turned democracy into a party, into a celebration. And a celebration, by the way, that did not exclude people who were not Democrats. It really, lots of people were actually in tears during that roll call because it just heightened how much the country really is e pluribus unum, out of many one. And, the speeches all emphasized that, and they really made it the sense that there was something new happening. But I'm actually going to say something a little different. And that was that It felt to me since the nomination of Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, to join the ticket, that the Democratic Party has changed really dramatically. And it's not that it's taken a real turn, it's that it is included in it something that really hasn't been there for a while. And that is what I have identified in the past as Midwestern progressivism. But more than that, which is a Republican phenomenon, but more than that, I think there is a shift afoot in that until about 1935, what government did essentially is it protected economic relationships between labor, capital, and resources. So, how much money should laborers get? How much should capitalists be able to do? Who gets control of resources and all that? In 1935, under Francis Perkins, who was Secretary of Labor under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the government suddenly turned to protecting communities. And that was not a partisan thing. It was the recognition that in order for the country to function, it had always functioned with the contributions of everybody. And it felt very much like with the inclusion of Walz and at that DNC, this idea that we were trying to recreate the concept of community as the basis of the country rather than economic relationships. And I think we are probably going to talk about whether or not the Democrats will win in November. But that shift is huge because of the implications it has for who matters, as in everyone, for what the government should do, as in make sure all those people, whether they are disabled or elderly or healthy young workers or whomever, manages to have the protection of the government and so on. That's I'm sort of standing back in awe, to be honest. What did you think?
I felt, first of all, I felt exactly the same way about that roll call. I cried through half of it because I've said it in a rant from Chicago that, we're told all the time that the country is so divided, that we are red and blue states, that we're never coming back together. And here we are in a room with all 50 states, all the territories, people from Alabama to Mississippi to Georgia to New York to Massachusetts, all in the same room, all Americans. And I thought, here we are. We're all here. Don't tell me that this country is completely divided. Here is a country representative of everybody. I couldn't get over the diversity. I kept thinking it's the diversity for me. It was the people sitting around me. It was the people in the delegations. It was the people on the stage. We were seeing everyone from the highlighting of our indigenous people to people in wheelchairs to Black, white, young, old, every kind of American you could ever imagine represented, truly represented on the stage. I was saying the very last night, the entire row in front of me was people from the indigenous community. And when Deb Howland came out on the stage, they all cried. I mean, they cried their eyes out. They were screaming anti-Deb. They were so thrilled to see themselves represented like that. And I thought, here's the thing. The Democratic Party has finally kind of found their groove. After years of struggling with messaging and trying to connect with people without coming off as wonky or, speaking in these constant shades of gray. I have a thing that I always say that if Coke is a slogan and the Democrats had come up with it, it would be like, Pepsi isn't it because here's the thing, there's nuance to the ingredients on that. And you're like, we lost you, and I just feel like, sadly, most people get bored with the nuance and the shades of gray. And I really feel like the Democrats found their way to drill in on this idea of hope and joy and being this nation that really won't go back to a time before women's rights, before civil rights, before workers' rights. And they kept sloganeering, which we're not particularly good at. But it felt organic. When we fight, we win, this kind of thing. I thought that the whole thing was actually quite moving. It's the first convention I've ever been to, but it felt, like you said, that there was some sort of a shift that had happened, that not only were we engaging the rural community, I mean, the Republicans are losing their mind that there's a camo hat that says Harris Walls. They're like, that's our thing. And you're like, actually, it's not. Just like the flag is not your thing. We have Democrats that are hunters. We have Democrats that are military people. We have Democrats that are this, that, and the other thing. And I tried to express to my audience through a bunch of breakdowns of each night what it really felt like to be in the room, because not everyone had the luxury of being there like you and I did. And it felt like a gift because it really showed you what's possible in America when people come together with a shared vision.
Yeah, I compared it in one of the nights to quite deliberately to rock concerts because of that feel in the room. I just want to add one thing to the roll call that really jumped out to me, and that was the degree to which the different state delegations were teasing each other. And if you think about it, you don't, and it was good natured teasing. It was
Yeah,
not
it was
coming down
familial.
at all. And well, familial is exactly the right word. You don't tease people that you are not close to. And it made it feel like all these states with all these different histories and all these different people in them really were part of a big family. And if you compare that to what the Republican roll call was like, Democrats were like a dance party. And it was really cool because you had people in their 80s dancing to DJ Cassidy, right? It was really a magical moment to be at, I think.
Yeah. And it also really showed how big our country is, how diverse it really is, the different cultures that happen within each state. You know, somebody said people often mock Americans for not having a passport, right? They're like, Americans don't even have passports. They never leave their own country. And somebody said, well, actually, America is gigantic. Like if you only traveled around America and you went to the Florida Keys and then you went to, you know, the Colorado mountains and then you went to the California coastline, you're literally in so many different countries that we have under one umbrella. And I think you really saw that in the roll call, not just with the music that DJ Cassidy chose for each state, which was so fun, but the way they talked about what their state had done, what their state was known for, who had come from their state. And like you said, the good-natured ribbing, you know, like we're New York, we're the best state in the nation. And everyone's like, boo. And Kathy Hochul comes out and she's like, "Glad we're in New York. What are you going to do?" Like it was hilarious. The whole thing felt fun and it felt like a community, even though we are this gigantic, gigantic country of 300 plus million people.
Well, and I love those when the states start boasting because they always have the obvious things, you know, we're the home of whatever, right? And the so and so came from this state. But then there's always some fact like we had the first man-made swimming pool that had a shallow end of 3 feet 4 inches east of the Mississippi. And you're like, first of all, how did you find that? And second of all, who's going to fact check it, right? I love those. I said to somebody during it, I would love to actually get the scripts that all those states used and write pieces based on them because, you know, I wouldn't think to be proud of some of those things, not because they're not necessarily things to be proud of, but like, who knows that stuff, you know?
Yeah, but you do. And it's home of the waffle, you know, like it's hilarious. Like it's wonderful. And I think it's funny we're talking about this because I know people complained that there were no policy ideas at the convention. And I don't know about you, but I watched the whole thing every single night. And I got a lot of policy ideas. I got the return of women's reproductive rights and freedoms, including protecting abortion care, IVF contraception. I heard the protection of gay rights. I heard treating the climate crisis with the gravity it deserves, protecting workers' rights, including shoring up our unions and raising the minimum wage to a living wage. I heard about protecting the Affordable Care Act and lowering the cost of prescription medications, tackling the gun violence issue, taking it seriously for once. And then, of course, we talked about this idea of the opportunity economy, where everyone gets a shot at the American dream. And I think you can really see that in the room. And like we said, the diversity, right? That the Harris-Walz campaign wants to lower the costs for everyday Americans with things like healthcare and housing and groceries and fighting back against corporations and their greed. So I don't know how people can say there was no policy there. I mean, Harris herself clearly said she was going to sign the John Lewis Rights Voters Act, protect our democracy and our right to vote. And she would sign the already negotiated border bill that Donald Trump and the Republicans kiboshed because she said, I'm not going to play politics with our security. That's a lot of policy.
Well, that critique always infuriates me as well, because, as you know, I'm a sort of a policy wonk in history. And so for almost 5 years now, I have been covering policies and I've been covering the vice president and the things that she's been doing, not as thoroughly as I've covered the president, for example, because of their different positions. But there are reams and reams and reams and reams of policy papers out there. And I think what you're seeing is a press that is looking to attack Harris and wants to have some fodder for doing that, because any policy that you put forward is going to have critiques to it, because by definition, you're going to have people who say, no, that's not going to work. If you move that by a quarter of a percentage point, you really should have done it by a third of a percentage point. And by the way, I know whereof I speak, because I studied all the tax laws that were written in the 19th century. And when they were trying to come up with the idea of national taxation for the first time, they literally would stand in Congress and argue for days over whether a barrel of sugar should be taxed with one price or another price that was half a cent higher. So this idea that you need the vice president to come out with more policy papers, I think is actually just an attempt to find ways to attack this momentum. Because think about, for example, Hillary Clinton in 2016. She had a gazillion policy papers, and all the press talked about was her emails. So in this case, I think I'm not entirely sure it's a fair critique to say, hey, we want policy papers here, when there is so much out there already. And when they are not holding former President Donald Trump to the same standard. He doesn't have policy papers at all. I mean, if you look at the Republican platform, it literally says things like, we're going to make the economy boom. Well, okay, so are you and me. I mean, what does that even look like? The only policies that he has suggested are extraordinarily vague and look like they will be, insanely inflationary, like these very high tariffs he wants everywhere. So I think, I kind of take a step back from that demand for policy papers and say, no, this is really about trying to create a media-driven story. Because if you really want to know what Harris stands for, it's there. I mean, she's done it. She's made all these speeches. She's done done all this work in the last 3 years. And it really sounds to me more like, hey, we want you to do what we want to put in our newspapers rather than, advancing people's knowledge of what's actually at stake in this election.
Exactly. And if we're talking about, lack of policy, I mean, Donald Trump had signs at the RNC convention that said mass deportations now. And I haven't seen any press being like, how do you plan to do that? Because we know that the plan is to round people up in camps, to use the U.S. military to round up people in massive cities around America and throw them into camps that they're going to build in Texas. Say that then, because people will be astonished and repulsed by your actual plan. You can't just say mass deportations and everyone's going to be kicked out of the country without explaining how you plan to do that. It's pretty astonishing. So if we talk about Republicans then, while the convention felt incredibly hopeful for the side that's promoting democracy and human rights, and such a stark contrast to Donald Trump's America is a failing nation and needs a dictator to control it through the agenda of Project 2025, I think you and I are both very clear that nothing is guaranteed, even though it seems very obvious which way the country should vote. That's not necessarily so. But I would think it's fair to say that the Republicans are clearly struggling with what's going on with the Democrats right now and the momentum and the energy on their side. So what's your take on where the Republicans sit right now, post-convention?
Well, one of the things you've just identified is the necessity of controlling the public narrative. And one of the things that the Republicans really have done since the 1980s was push the idea that the Democrats are un-American, that they're bad for the economy, which we know is absolutely not true. One of the things that former President Bill Clinton said during the convention was that since 1989, there have been 51 million jobs created in the United States. 50 million of them under Democrats, 1 million under Republicans. It's an astonishing statistic, and it is true.
It is true.
They've pushed that idea, and they've pushed this idea that for Democrats to have power is illegitimate. And in order to make that come true, to make it impossible for Democrats to hold power, beginning in really all the way back to the 1980s, they began to suppress the vote. And then really quite dramatically, as soon as Barack Obama goes into office in 2009, Senate Minority Leader at the time, Mitch McConnell, who was a Republican from Kentucky, began to weaponize the filibuster so the Democrats literally could not pass any laws unless they could get 60 votes in the Senate. There were 5 months that they could do that. And during those times, they passed the Affordable Care Act. Then once that happens, of course, in 2010, you get Citizens United, which permits the flow of corporate money into elections. And then by 2013, we get Shelby County versus Holder, which guts the Voting Rights Act. So there's been this real attempt to control the narrative and say that Democrats are communists or socialists and they shouldn't have a say in society. And in a way, it became, I used to talk about it, it became almost as if the American people were in an abusive relationship with the Republicans because they kept moving the goalposts, and kept insisting that whatever the Democrats did was wrong. Well, all of a sudden that narrative has shifted. That narrative is flipped. And all of a sudden, it feels as if those Americans, and they are not just members of the Democratic Party, but those Americans who no longer want to follow the MAGA Republicans over the cliff with Donald Trump, are pushing back and saying, now, wait a minute here. The Democrats seem to be doing quite a good job with the economy. And wait a minute here. We actually like this happy vibe. Wait a minute here. Crime has plummeted. Wait a minute here. In fact, migrants coming across the border have also plummeted. The numbers of migrants have also plummeted. And with that change in, I don't want to call it vibe because I don't like that word, with that change in ideology and the power relationship between the two parties, the Republicans don't have very much to go forward with because their presidential nominee is, he's off the rails. If you're following him as I am, he is off the rails. J.D. Vance is charmless. Now they've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on board, and he seems like his attachment to the rails is also under considerable question. And I think it leaves the Republicans with the option that I think that they have been looking at really for a long time now, and that is not to try to win the popular vote. I don't think they've been trying to win the popular vote, and that became very clear when Trump literally said to Nikki Haley supporters, don't try and join us, we don't want you. But with the attempt to throw the election, make the election muddy enough that the certification of ballots in the states gets put off long enough that the election gets thrown into the House of Representatives where every state gets a single vote. If there are more Republican-dominated states than Democratic-dominated states, Trump could win the election, or they could throw it into the Supreme Court, where this Supreme Court, having decided in July that the president cannot be held accountable for committing crimes while in office, chances seem pretty good as if they are willing to say to Trump, yeah, sure, you won the election. And so one of the things I think that you see going on in this moment is it is imperative for the Republicans under Trump to maintain the fiction that they are popular. And with this switch in the Democratic momentum, it doesn't look like they're popular. So you keep seeing Trump saying, I've got the votes, I'm way up in the polls, everybody loves me, and so on. And it's increasingly hard to square that with what you're seeing coming from the Democratic side.
Yeah. It is. I've said for a long time that they're no longer trying to win on policy or personality. They're trying to win on suppression and misinformation and disinformation. I mean, I'm well and certain that the Republicans know they can't win this election. They can't win it fair and square. So they're putting all their chips in on, like I was saying, suppression, subversion, intimidation, pulling just enough votes from Democrats in swing states with, say, Kennedy still on the ballot in certain places, Cornel West, Jill Stein, that they can swing the Electoral College to Trump, or conversely, make sure no candidate wins a majority. Neither candidate wins a majority. So like you said, the entire election is pushed to the House. And just so people understand, constitutionally, that is what happens. If neither candidate receives the majority of the Electoral College votes, the election is pushed to the House of Representatives, where each state gets one vote, and the Republicans will win because they represent more states in the House of Representatives, despite the fact that they represent fundamentally way less voters. So in a country this size, this would be a shockingly undemocratic way to decide our president, because the state of Wyoming, with its population of less than 600,000 people, will get the same vote for president that the state of California, with its population of 40 million people, would get. But I'm starting to really think that that is their plan. I want the audience to understand that we haven't done this since 1825, pushed the election right to the House. And at the time, we only had 24 states, and the population of America was just under 10 million people. So we now have 300 million plus people. We have 50 states. We have a bunch of territories. And I think that the idea that we would let 50 states decide our election with one vote each is insane. And I don't really care if it's constitutional. It's insane, which is probably why the Harris campaign is staffing up with so many lawyers, because they have about 10 times the lawyers that the Biden campaign did. I think it's because they expect that they're going to have to battle the Republicans on multiple fronts during and after the election. The Republicans aren't trying to win based on, where we're going to take the country. They are going to try and do this through the courts, through voter suppression, through saying these ballots don't count. You can't count these people. These people voted too late. These signatures don't match. All of these things. So I was reading a Times report that said that the Harris-Walz campaign now has a legal team of hundreds of staff attorneys, thousands of volunteer attorneys, all to combat the expected election challenges from Republicans in November, including the election results themselves. They are expecting the Republicans not to accept the election results. The Republicans seem to be looking to repeat 2020 by setting up disinformation and misinformation now and tying the election up in the courts as a way to undermine the win, and then getting it to Trump's Supreme Court where they think they have the votes.
Well, remember, this was literally the plan in 2020. So somebody said, I don't believe they'd really do this. And I'm like, they wrote it down right in 2020. Yeah, but if you think about, and I'm going to, weirdly, I actually read the paperwork from the election of 1824 this week. And
of course you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little weird. It's like when there was the thing about the Arizona law in the territory that was the anti-abortion law. And I just happened, for various weird reasons, to have read that. And I'm like, I happen to have read that just now.
Actually.
But I mean, again, I do read a lot of history, but that was a little weird. And in this case, I read through it because it's actually out of that 1824 election that we get the rise of political conventions. And so I was reading about political conventions. But if you step back from this moment, one of the real issues we have going forward is that the Republican Party has taken advantage of the vestiges that are still in our system, like the Electoral College, which made a heck of a lot more sense before we had steel frame construction starting in 1873, which enables you to have big cities, because until then you don't have the framework to support giant buildings so that people can all crowd together, or modern transportation, which enables people to move around a big city. They use the vestiges of our system to institute minority rule in the country. And what you are describing, the idea that the people in Wyoming, bless them all, should have power over the people in California, the many, 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 many more people in California, is minority rule. And after the election of 1828, when in fact Andrew Jackson, who was a deeply problematic character in a lot of ways, but Andrew Jackson actually got a plurality of the popular vote and of the electoral votes, but the other candidates in that election were so horrified at the idea that Andrew Jackson might become president that they all banded together to elect John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams was the son of a president of John Adams. And so it made it look as if there was sort of this idea that the people weren't going to have a say. And at that point, Jackson really says, this electoral college is a huge problem, because what you are saying is that you can manipulate it in such a way that the American people don't really have a say in their president. And once he becomes president after the election of 1828, he actually repeatedly says to Congress, we must get rid of this electoral college for this reason. If in fact you want to preserve the idea of democracy, you must not have a system that enables you to cement into it minority rule. And we have this. He says this in the early 1800s. And here we are, almost 200 years later, with the exact situation that he said, you're going to have a real problem with minority rule. And speaking of policies here, one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I'm not sure enough other people do, although some do, there have been war game scenarios of this. And by war games, I don't mean leading to war. I mean where you game out something. What does it look like? What does it look like if Harris and Walz win the election by millions of votes, because Biden won by about 7 million votes. Hillary Clinton won by more. By over 2 million votes. What does it look like if they win in a landslide and the Republicans steal it? I mean, do all those people whose votes just got canceled go, oh, well, we'll just sit out Project 2025 for the next 4 years and watch our democracy go up in smoke? I mean, is this why the Republicans are so strongly emphasizing the use of the Insurrection Act, as Project 2025 does, as Russell Vogt did in that secretly recorded video that got leaked, I guess it was last week, kept talking about how the president can use the Insurrection Act to use active duty forces against American citizens, which is true under certain circumstances, but has been outlawed since 1878 under the Posse Comitatus Act. I mean, what does that look like? And It doesn't look like anything good, at least from where I sit.
No, it doesn't look like anything good from where I sit either. And honestly, it's interesting you're talking about this War Games thing, because I'm actually going to have the Vote Vets creator and producer of one of the best of those, where the idea is that the Democratic presidency wins the plurality and the majority of all of the votes, and still there is a pushback like there was in 2020, but far, far worse. And I'm going to have her on the show to talk about the film and how it all played out. And it really is a fascinating exercise in intellectualizing what could happen to us and how we would react. I think that the whole thing is so fascinating because it's so interesting that you're talking about Jackson, because we both know he's such a problematic president. And yet he had a problem from the beginning with the Electoral College, and he had a problem from the beginning with the Supreme Court saying they were the ones who had final say on all constitutional matters, that they were the final word of the law. And he was like, that's ridiculous. And I'm ignoring that. And I think it's interesting that Jackson is the person that's noticed both those things, because we all know he was a terrible racist and horrible to the indigenous people. And yet you can be two things at once. And he was very aware of where the problems in our system lay. I do think that the convention really sent Trump himself over the edge. He was already struggling with the size of the Harris rallies and the Democrats adding walls to the ticket, which people just adore. And he's kind of been reduced to his old shtick, saying the crowds are fake, the Democrats are using AI. Now we are apparently communists or socialists or Marxists, which has been a boogeyman that they've thrown around for a million years, which are also three different philosophies that the Republicans use indiscriminately. Do you think this works? Do you think their spin machine is functioning as well this time around? You guys know that I talk about Marley Spoon all the time. Well, I'm just back from Chicago, so I just put in my order for the next 3 weeks. I actually find it fun to do the ordering because Marley Spoon has so many options to choose from, and it makes the whole experience kind of exciting. One of the worst parts about cooking dinner is the thinking about what to cook. This way, I get to think about what I want to eat, and it's way more fun. The last order I put in was Martha's Best Chicken Shawarma and Hummus Bowl, Mexican Street Corn Chicken Salad, and Sheet Pan Shrimp Tacos. And the thing is, they give you all the cooking time on each one, so you can decide how much effort you want to put in that week, and they send you a list before your box is delivered to make sure you have all the extra things you might need for the recipe, like olive oil or apple cider vinegar. And the food is so good. Like, our family is consistently impressed at how excellent the quality is, because we've done a lot of these meal delivery services, and most of them are just not that good. Marley Spoon is the real deal. And not only do they have amazing recipes to choose from, but those recipes are also completely customizable. So you can have your meal, but say with an Impossible Burger meat instead of regular ground beef, or pork instead of chicken. They can also save you from making an extra trip to the grocery store with their online market pantry, or you can shop their extensive selection of add-ons like seasonal produce, ready-to-heat meals, or say extra proteins. And with Marley Spoon, you aren't locked in. It's a flexible subscription service. So say we put it on hold the week we were away at the DNC. And when my son was at camp, we took our meals down to 2 portions instead of our normal 4. I really can't recommend this meal delivery system enough. There is a reason Martha Stewart put her name on it. So experience the most personalized meal kit today with Marley Spoon. Head to marleyspoon.com/offer/PoliticsGirl and use the code PoliticsGirl for up to 25 free meals. That's right, up to 25 free meals with Marley Spoon. One last time, that is marleyspoon.com/offer/PoliticsGirl for up to 25 free meals. And make sure you use my promo code PoliticsGirl so they know I sent you. I can say this wholeheartedly because I know you will not be disappointed. And speaking of meal kits, my boy might be 16 now, but I remember those days of picky eating. Lachlan used to do this thing where he would put food in his mouth, and if he didn't like it, he would just chew it endlessly without swallowing. His dad and I would watch in horror as it became what I can only imagine was paste in his mouth, and we'd both be like, swallow it! You need to swallow it! And often he would just end up dropping it out of his mouth onto his plate. It was brutal. which is why I thought it was so cool when I heard about Nurture Life. Nurture Life is a meal delivery service focused on helping busy parents easily feed their children, from babies to kids from 10 months to 10 years. The company not only provides fresh meals, but snacks that are nutritious and fully cooked, which means that if you're a busy parent, these meals are ready to serve in just 1 minute. Nurture Life lets kids enjoy healthy, nutritionally balanced diets while still eating all of their favorite things like mac and cheese and spaghetti and meatballs. And meals are made fresh every week. They are never frozen, and they are shipped directly to your door. You just choose from over 50 varieties of balanced meals on the weekly menu, and that is everything from finger foods for babies and toddlers to full meals for older kids. Nurture Life does all the cooking, and the fresh meals are ready to go and delivered straight to your door in refrigerated packaging. Nurture Life's mission is to raise the standard of children's food in America. And along with their full meal options, the menu also includes snacks and superfood smoothies so kids can eat well no matter what they're in the mood for. Honestly, it is about time that a flexible meal subscription kit existed for babies and kids. So head to nurturelife.com and use the code PoliticsGirl for 55% off your first order. Yeah, that's right, 55% off. Once again, that is nurturelife.com for 55% off. And make sure you use my promo code PoliticsGirl so they know I sent you. As I said a couple of weeks ago, the PoliticsGirl podcast is thrilled to reintroduce our audience to AG1. I talked about AG1 on this pod for years. They were one of our first supporters of the show because our missions lined up. We were trying to add something sincere to help the world, and they were trying to add something sincere to help the body. If you don't know, AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support and is backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body. If your gut isn't functioning well, it's more challenging to absorb the nutrients from a healthy diet. But with AG1, you can prioritize gut support. In fact, in a recent research study, AG1 doubled the amount of healthy bacteria in the gut, including 2 species known for supporting gut health and whole body health. Some signals you might need extra gut support include bloating, feeling backed up, general discomfort after eating. From the day our family started drinking AG1, we loved it, and we really noticed a difference in how we felt. My husband liked it. I even gave it to my 81-year-old dad, and he loved it. If you care about the food you put into your body, your supplements shouldn't be any different. And AG1 is constantly putting their formula to the test and backing it by multiple research studies. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it would be AG1. And that's why I am so excited to have them back as a partner. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin DK2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/politicsgirl. That's drinkag1.com/politicsgirl. So I don't eat that well on a normal day. I usually only get a proper meal at dinner. But as Heather and I were saying, being at the Democratic Convention was something else. Even if we just had to eat pretzels or chicken fingers or hot dogs, whatever was in the United Center, but often we just went without a meal. It is hard to function like that. So Sean and I were both so glad to have mosh bars in our bags. We needed something to keep our body and our brain functioning, and for us, mosh bars was the way to go. The older I get, the more intentional I try to be about the way I eat and take care of my body. But this was a super weird week, so we were really pleased that we were already Mosh fans. You may have heard about Mosh on Shark Tank. Mosh is a company founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger with a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to make something beyond your average protein bar. With 10 delicious flavors, including 3 that are plant-based, each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health, like lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. Mosh bars now come with a new look and formulation featuring the first and only brand boosted with cognizin, a premium neurotropic that supports the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. So basically, brain boosters. And here's the best part. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and Mosh is working closely to close that gap between men and women's health research. I'm always going on and on about their lemon and white chocolate flavor, and Sean finally tried that flavor in Chicago, and he was like, "Oh, I get the hype." So if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and brain, Mosh bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/politicsgirl to save 20% off plus free shipping on either their bestsellers trial pack or the new plant-based trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the bestsellers or the plant-based trial pack at moshlife.com/politicsgirl. Thank you, Mosh, for continuing to sponsor the Politics Girl podcast. Do you think their spin machine is functioning as well this time around?
I don't. And I don't think it's functioning as well, primarily for two reasons. The first is that Rush Limbaugh died in 2021. So if you think about it, Rush Limbaugh was so instrumental in providing a blueprint for what Republicans should say that in the 1990s, when Republicans took control of the House of Representatives, they literally made him an honorary member of the incoming freshman class that year into the House of Representatives. And without that poll for what the Republicans should be saying, and also with the Fox News settlement for lying about the big lie in 2020, I believe it was $787 million settlement, Fox News has backed off as well on giving people their marching orders for what to say. And what that has meant is that Republicans who want to get attention in social media and want to build up their own campaigns, especially in places where they've been gerrymandered. So what their role is really to do is not to get in votes in a general election because they know they're going to win, but rather to push their appearances on social media or on the media. What you get is this splintering of more and more extreme arguments coming that then get put back into the mainstream. And what that has done is it's really radicalized the Republican Party, but it's also splintered it. And so it's not clear any longer what a mainstream Republican position looks like. And you could see that in the last week with the fight in the Michigan Republican delegation. They literally threw out of the hall their former chair, right? They're fighting within the party. And again, Mitch McConnell sort of throwing up his hands, who theoretically is the titular head of the party, saying, I have no influence. And so what that has meant, I think, is that there is this internecine fight in the Republican Party, and it doesn't have terribly clear messaging. And the messaging that does get out is the messaging of people like Mark Robinson, who's running for governor of North Carolina, saying that he wants to go back to a time before women could vote. Or some of the really extreme things that people hear and say, I don't want any part of that. But that being said, that presupposes that people are paying attention. And one of the things that you and I both know is that if people don't know about Project 2025 and they tend to vote Republican, they're just going to vote that R. As soon as they hear about Project 2025 and really understand what's in it, they flip to the Democrats. And so you could see how that played out in the coverage of the Democratic National Convention, for example, with the Fox News channel not ever covering a single one of the Republican speeches at the DNC, because they didn't want that message to get out, that it was okay for Republicans in this election to switch to vote for democracy and for the rule of law. So I do think the Republicans are on the ropes, but I think that they are doing exactly what you identified, an attempt to steal the election, basically. And one of the things that honestly keeps me up at night when we talk about what that might look like, and really, this is a hard one for me to leave behind, is think about January 6th and how extraordinarily close the rioters got to capturing, at the very least, Mitt Romney, whom they really hated because he had voted to convict Trump on one count in his first impeachment. Think about your own reaction if, in fact, the rioters had gotten their hands on Romney or on the vice president or on the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or on the Senate President pro tem, who's the next in line. Think about all those people who were lined up to be next in order for the presidency. And if any of those people had actually been captured by the rioters, and Trump had called out the Insurrection Act, which we know he wanted to do, turning the troops against them, and seized control of Washington, what would you have done? That is, in retrospect, we know it was a setup, but I don't know what I would have done had the rioters gotten Vice President Mike Pence. because that's an attack on our democracy. And when you think about that and the confusion that was around that and all the things that could have happened, I feel like we were so lucky that day. But then I look at this election and I think we must be prepared for that to happen, to play out the scenarios, to see how we would react, and above all, to make sure he does not have the opportunity to make that happen again.
Yeah. We have to let people know about Project 2025 because once they know, they can't unknow. And it really is so anathema to what people want for this country. And once they understand the details of it, I mean, you recently did a Zoom call with the Red, Wine, and Blue group. And I think there were something like 30,000 people on that call, which is a lot. And you were speaking about Project 2025 and people were interested in hearing about it. This conservative plan for leadership. And I keep saying, like, people have to understand this isn't a Trump thing. Like, yes, it will come with Trump, but it'll come with any future Republican leader. These are the people, the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society. These are the people really calling the shots. And this is what we're going to be living under in a second Republican and a next Republican presidency. And the thing that we were talking about it. I was talking with Laura Rodriguez at the convention, who's with the Center for American Progress. And she said the difference between Project 2025 and any regular policy proposal that we hear about when people are campaigning, oh, this is something I'm going to do, this is something I'm going to do, is that it isn't just a plan, it is a manual. It is a how-to manual. It's like, this is what we plan to do, and these are the steps we're going to take to do it, and they have all intention of following each one of those steps. There is a complete plan to execute this, including firing what will end up being hundreds of thousands of civil servants and replacing them with loyalists and consolidating the entire federal government around one man, one party, and just changing the rules on their behalf. And I think once people know that, and I think it's very important that we are responsible for our people and we go out into the world. If I know, I must tell all the people I know, even if they're not paying attention. It is my job to tell other people what is happening so they can hear it for themselves and look for themselves and hear things and think, oh, I think that's wrong. Or that's the thing that so-and-so, my mother, my sister, my brother, Lee was talking about. And be aware, because what we are dealing with is incredibly dangerous and people really need to know that.
Well, one of the things that always jumps out to me is that what does it say to you that a political party is doing its very best to hide from voters what they intend to do? That is, they literally say it in private and then go out in front of the cameras and lie. And, first of all, what does that say about their disdain for voters, that they're willing to lie to people to get their votes? But then what does it say about what they really intend to do with that power? If they were doing things that were popular, they'd be shouting them from the rooftops, the way, for example, Tim Walz is, yeah, sure, I got free food for free breakfast and lunch for kids in the schools. Instead, they're trying to say, oh, we believe in patriotism and we believe in, one of the things in Trump's platform this year is he will stop World War III. Well, that's a nice idea. I mean, like, who wouldn't want to stop World War III? But what is he doing what does he plan to do to make that happen when you actually have an extraordinarily strong State Department right now running around like jackrabbits trying to calm things around the world? Instead of actually admitting what they're trying to do, they're lying to people. They're trying to make sure people can't vote. They're trying to install themselves into power and then do whatever they want. And I think that, not only Project 2025 and the very detailed pieces of Project 2025 in that more than 900-page document, that I think is crucial. That why would you support somebody who is lying to you, who is trying to make sure that you don't have a say, who is trying to take over the government so they can impose whatever they want, and whose bedfellows are people like Viktor Orban in Hungary and Vladimir Putin in Russia? That says to me, aside from the details of Project 2025, these are not people you want to follow. These are people you want to reject. And then you want to come over here and say, okay, listen, I may not agree with you about immigration. I may not agree with you about financial policies. I may not agree with you about the way we teach things in school, but I can agree that all of our voices matter. And we have to find a way to move forward together as Americans have always done. And that's the other crucial thing, is that they're trying to destroy our traditional American democracy and replace it with Christian nationalism. And that's never been popular. The only way they can make it happen is by lying to people and cheating in this election.
And using minority rule.
The end is minority rule, yes. But just for what it's worth, one of the things that I hear sometimes from people, well, they're my people. I want these people in because they're my people. I don't care if they're a minority, they're right. And they're going to do what's right for the rest of the country. And so that's good. And that's actually the ideology behind this. But anybody who studies authoritarianism across the board, we could not find a single person who would not say this, recognizes that when you put an authoritarian into power, the nature of authoritarian power is such that nobody is protected. Nobody, even those who start on that authoritarian's team, is protected from the whims of that governmental organization that may suddenly decide, hey, we need your factory. Oh, you know what? Your part of the country is the part of the country that's going to have to go to war. Oh, so this is your profession? Too bad we're not going to have those any longer. And across the board, and I could sit here and spiel off some of those examples, but again, you can look in the modern era just to Hungary, where people trusted Viktor Orban to, make his country great. And instead, they are now seeing, for example, their factories get confiscated, their children losing the right to actually have what used to be quite a good education, and so on. So those people who think that putting Trump and his ilk in power are at least going to be good for them, they got another thing coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always say if you give people the power to suppress people's votes, to take their companies, to do things like that, it will turn around on you. It must, because it doesn't stop. If I give you all the power, if I say, oh, I love gerrymandering because my team wins every time, what you're saying is, I don't mind votes being suppressed. I don't mind votes being taken away. And I often say, but you're a voter. Like, you're a voter. If you vote for people that want to take votes away from people, it doesn't matter if they're currently taking votes away from people you don't like. You're giving them the power to take votes away. And ultimately, you're the voter, and they're not going to need you anymore if you give them enough power. I say the same things to the super rich people in America who are like, this works out for me. I'm going to get lower taxes. I'm going to do really well. I'm like, how well do you think you're going to do under an authoritarian leader? Look to Putin, right? He comes into power. He goes to all the major companies, shuts down most of the media industries, keeps his RT, and then says to the major corporations, like, listen, give me half your company or I'll take it all and I'll throw you in a gulag and say you're against the country. And that will happen here in America too. You think that the richest people in America are just handing down their wealth and their companies to their children? Nope. The government's going to take a cut. That's what happens. You're out of your mind if you think it's going to serve you, because it just fundamentally won't. And let me ask you, do you think that Donald Trump is really still the leader of this ticket? Because right now, J.D. Vance, who is personality free and terrible at all of this, he's just the worst, but he's an empty vessel, right? He was chosen by the Peter Thiels and these major power players who really want to run the country. He'll put into himself anything they tell him to do. He will do what he is told to do. He is who he is paid to be. But Donald Trump isn't really even campaigning anymore, right? He's going to a couple of rallies. He's on social media, but it's J.D. Vance that's out there right now. And now we have RFK added to the campaign. And people think the Kennedy name's going to help, despite the fact that the rest of the Kennedys are like, holy hell, that's not us. Is Donald Trump even the leader of this ticket anymore? Because I feel like he's a liability. And I always say, if Trump wins, he should look out for open windows, because he's not making it through, this presidency. They want someone they can control more. And that's someone like J.D.
This is one of those places where it does help to disentangle it a little bit, in the sense that the Republicans who want to seize power in the United States, either to impose Christian nationalism or because they think it's going to give them control over the nation's financial system and the nation's economy. Two separate groups there, by the way. They need Trump at the top of the ticket because Trump can turn out voters. Trump's voters are extraordinarily loyal to Trump, and they are not going to switch that loyalty to J.D. Vance.
No.
They might have switched it to somebody like Michael Flynn. He was somebody I was watching really closely. But they need, they are Trump voters, because Trump has taken on a quality that is very much less about him than it is about his followers. They're part of that movement. And that's how they see themselves. And they will not hear anything to the contrary. Now, just for the record here, a reactionary movement like that will never get more than about top 33% of the people behind it in any country. So that's a fairly limited amount, but they need those votes. Trump himself, as I say, has I was referring the other day, I don't know if you remember this, to the Carol Burnett show when Vicki Lawrence as Mama was telling Carol Burnett as the daughter that she had done something really, she had really lost her way. And she was like, there's no crackers left in your box. There's no crayons left in, that's kind of where Trump is right now. There are no crackers left in his box. They need him on the ticket, but it seems to me extraordinarily clear that they want to get elected thanks to him and then push him off stage. And I think he knows this. How can he not know this? He's 78 years old. He appears not to be in terribly good health. And it seems as if he thinks he was running the show. And now it's pretty clear by putting JD Vance on there with his ties to these tech bros, these extraordinarily wealthy tech bros, who are now pushing the idea of, I don't know if you saw it, but on Thursday, Donald Trump tweeted that there is now a new Trump cryptocurrency and a new banking platform that they're trying to do called the Defiant Ones. They are clearly trying to put somebody else in power and take over for Trump once they actually make it into office. And, I don't know what that looks like, because JD Vance is not a good politician. He's a very inexperienced politician. And who does that then put into power? And I'm not sure I'm willing to take a stand on who that puts into power, but I do think what you're seeing is a cobbled together mess right now, just trying to take over the United States government. And the reason that matters, aside from your life and my life, is, as I always say to people, there is no more valuable real estate in the world than the United States of America. And I am not talking about the value of the land. If you control the United States of America, you control the world. And this is a really big election. That is literally what's at stake. And who is the person who expects to, or the people who expect to end up in control, is not entirely clear to me. But I do think that anybody who thinks we're simply going to replay Donald Trump's first administration, if he gets put back in power, is delusional, in the sense that we will have walked away from an American democracy and turned to something else. And what that will look like, at the very least, is the loss of rights for LGBTQ plus Americans, for women, for racial and gender minorities. But it could look much more like an authoritarian country that aligns with other authoritarian countries to destroy the concept of liberal democracy altogether and turn us into a globe of autocrats who tell the rest of us what to do.
Yeah. And I think that has been the plan all the way along. I think that's why Russia was behind the first Trump run. I think that ultimately the idea is to destroy the idea of democracy being a working system. Anne Applebaum did a great article years ago called Autocracy Inc. in The Atlantic, where she said it's basically two major corporations, Democracy Inc. and Autocracy Inc. And the Autocracy Inc. people, they're not sharing an ideology. They're not like, we're all fascists or we're all Christian nationalists or they all have this sense that they want to be singular people in power over the entire society. They want society to look the way they want it to look, even if it's not the same, from Xi Jinping's China to Hungary to Putin to what's happening in Venezuela. They all have different ideas of how they want their country to look, but it starts with their own personal power, their own personal money. And Donald Trump wants to fit into that group. Like when he talks about ending World War III, making sure we don't have World War III, that's giving all the autocrats that are constantly causing us problems everything they want. Because why would we be fighting if we just gave Ukraine to Putin? If we just gave Gaza to Netanyahu? If we just gave Iran what they wanted? If we just said, yeah, take what you want, no problem. America's not going to stop you. Because like you said, if you control the United States of America, you control the world. And people say to me often, they're like, if he wins again, I'm moving. You're probably going to go back to Canada, which is where I'm from. And I'm like, no, man, like, here's the thing. Where in the world do you think you are safe from an autocratic America with the biggest military in the world that, in Canada, it would take them how long to turn their sights on us to go, oh, well, here's a beautiful country with absolutely no military and, a very limited military and no wall with all these lovely natural resources. How long would an autocratic America before they turned their eyes on Canada? Come on. There's nowhere in the world you're safe. So we have to stop this from not just for you and me and for women's rights and gay rights and human rights and workers' rights, but for the literally the future of the world and the planet.
The other piece to this is that when he was FBI director, James Comey gave a speech in New York that became known as the Iron Triangle speech. And he was talking about the fact that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's been a new kind of organized crime around the world. And it consists of these autocrats, but it also is really behind a lot of the crime in the globe because there's so much money available in narcotics, for example, or human trafficking or money laundering, all the different ways in which criminals work around the system. And one of the points he makes is that those people trying to garner power don't share an ideology. They don't share a religion. What they do share is the determination to run their countries, to work with other autocrats who run their countries, and crucially also to work with criminals. And this is one of the things that I think it's hard for people to get their heads around, is the degree to which money laundering has come to be a major part of life in the United States and in the United Kingdom. How businesses that seem legitimate also support illegitimate businesses and so on. And that's one of the things that's going to take a long time to untangle, but seems crucially important. And, I don't know when you're going to show this, but yesterday, the person who started Telegram, the messaging app and the social media app, was arrested in France, and he is from Russia, and messengers out of Russia. And, I don't know anything about the charges suggest that he should have been cleaning up Messenger more quickly than he has with the stuff that happens on it. But who knows actually this early on what's really going on with that arrest. But that, I think, if you look at the panic that arrest entailed in Russia, and the fact that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson in the United States were posted about how unhappy they were about the arrest, indicates, this overlap of, most people probably use Messenger to message people, but then other people use it to, facilitate human trafficking. And that whole overlap of legitimate and illegitimate is one that I think took me a long time to wrap my head around. And it was really the Comey speech, which is available online if anybody wants to read it, that made me go, I get it. I get it. So, some of these people who seem to be operating legitimately above the line are also operating illegitimately below the line. And the only places that are trying, or the only groups that are trying to stop that, are the liberal democracies that operate under the rule of law, and holding those people to account. One of the reasons that people in autocracies don't want to support democracies is because they don't want to answer to a government. And that might remind you of somebody else.
Somebody else who pardoned all of his friends and family from their crimes and surrounds himself with felons? Yes, it does remind me of somebody else. I mean, listen, if the election was just about numbers of votes, the Democrats would have it in the bag, right? You were mentioning things before about Hillary Clinton's numbers and Biden's numbers. I just want to remind people, Al Gore got 500,000 more votes than George W., and he lost. Hillary got almost 3 million more votes than Trump, lost. Biden got 7 million more votes than Trump, and the election came down to maybe 40,000 votes in a handful of swing states, and a third of the country still believes he lost that election, which is bananas, right? So I think we know what the Trump campaign and all the people that are actually behind Trump are planning. And it's that they're not going to accept the results of the 2024 election. If Vice President Harris wins, the whole thing will likely end up in court. And I think we just have to keep on keeping on, that we're going to win by a lot of numbers, but we need to win by a lot of numbers in every single possible swing state. Everyone needs to come out for this, because it's going to be such a battle. It won't be that we all know everything on November 5th. We have to get all the way to January 6th, and then we have to get to January 21st or 20th. And then we can be like, okay, now let's try and reset the country with the rule of law, start making some of these norms that we expected, like a felon shouldn't run for president, into a law, because clearly we have laid ourselves in some real trouble here. And we have to get ourselves all the way to the, keeping democracy's head above water, and then start making some real choices so we don't end up in this position again, because clearly there are forces here and around the world that really want to take us down a terrible, terrible path.
I want to add to that. And that is, while we are focused, you and I in this discussion have been focused on the presidential campaign, and certainly people are focused on the Senate and the House of Representatives, your state representatives matter hugely, because the certification in many states of the vote will come down to who's sitting in the legislatures.
Right.
So all of those votes matter enormously. And a lot of states have been gerrymandered such that the Republicans are still going to control them. But there are a lot of states where it's possible to either flip those state legislatures or also to make sure election officials are going to do the right thing. For all that everyone's excited about Harris and Walz, the state elections really, really matter, especially for state offices, especially around the election. So people who are looking for places to put energy and they're like, Harris seems to have it in the bag. No. We need people on the ground working for the state houses and for election officials in the states before this incredibly crucial counting period.
Yeah. And if people question state legislatures' power, just look at the red states that have just stripped women of their rights around the country. They have immense power. And if you want to help with that, I would highly recommend you go to thestatesproject.org. They do amazing work. They've done tons of research of which state houses are easy to flip, which state houses you can stop a supermajority, which state houses they could actually put to a Democratic majority. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 seats that you just have to win. And you can spend way less money and energy trying to flip a state house seat than you could ever do trying to flip a congressional seat. So if you really want to make a difference, that actually is a great idea. And thanks for mentioning it. I really appreciate it. And so I think that's the thing when it comes down to it. I was going to ask you before you leave, what do you think we should be doing to ensure democracy prevails in November? And you're basically saying all the races count. Everything matters at this point from the Harris Walz ticket right on down to your state houses and who your Secretary of State is, who your AG is, who are the people that are going to count your ballots and make sure your vote counts, and then are going to litigate in that state to make sure that the votes that were cast are counted. These are all essential roles. What else would you add to that list?
What I would add to that list is to defend democracy. One of the things that I think got us into the mess we're in is that we thought democracy was a given in the United States. And so we criticized it a lot about all the places in which our government and the people that it governs have made mistakes. And we've made big mistakes. But the concept of human self-determination, as it is embodied in the idea of democracy, is still one of the most revolutionary ideas in human history. It is still contested. All around the world. Think of women in Afghanistan, for example. And the idea that we would not defend it, as easy as it is to defend it with our words and our peaceful actions, as opposed to with weaponry, as other countries have to do, seems to me to be an abdication of the extraordinary birthright that those people who live in the United States have been given. It's okay to be proud to live in America. It's okay to be proud to live in a democracy and to defend democracy, and also to admit that we've never gotten it right, because that's the whole point of democracy. It is always a work in progress. We never get it 100% right because humans got a human, right? But that idea of the joy in protecting our American democracy, I think, is the one where we started. And that idea that was encapsulated by the Democratic National Convention, that it's okay to love America and recognize its faults. It's okay to fight for the concept of human self-determination and to honor those principles that the founders put into the Declaration of Independence, even if at the time they couldn't understand how far that would go. So to go into this campaign, not only with incredibly hard work, because we are all going to be working way too hard to make this happen. It's going to be a very close election. But also with joy and with the consciousness that we are part of a long line of people who gave up an awful lot to protect this concept of democracy is probably a good way to go into this, because this is our election. This is our time to protect our birthright. And that's actually how I'll be going forward. And I hope other people can pick up that kind of joy and do the same.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Before you go, tell people how they can follow your work, because I follow your work and I absolutely love your Substack. But tell people how they can get your books, follow your work, and join you in this joy as we lead up to November.
So I'm on all the social media platforms, but the place really to follow me is either on Facebook, which often suppresses me, at Heather Cox Richardson. And there's only one official one. All the other ones are fake, and we take them down as fast as we can. Or if you want to get my daily letter about politics and history, it's Letters from an American. It's available on Substack, and you can either go to the website to see it there, or you can sign up for it at heathercoxrichardson.substack.com. And all of the places I appear are free. Substack will ask you to put in a credit card. You can ignore that sucker, go right over it, and it'll come to your email every day.
Well, we could also pay you because God knows you've given us a lot of good information. So I'm going to say that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Heather. I'm telling you, we all think democracy is a given. We've been so busy living in a democracy that we forgot we have to fight for it. And I hope that people will understand now that you can be mad at your government, but you shouldn't get rid of the one form of government that allows your voice still to be heard. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you will come back after we have won this election and we can discuss what comes next.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
So that was the brilliant Heather Cox Richardson, reminding us that democracy is not a given. And though we have to fight for it, we should find joy in being warriors for our own right to self-determination. That the Republicans are used to controlling the narrative and holding the mantle of patriotic American. But the Democratic Convention showed the world that they aren't the only ones with the right to such a title. That it is our job to stop this rising authoritarian movement in America. And we do that by electing the Harris-Walz ticket, but also by giving them Congress to accomplish their goals and as many state houses as possible to hold the line for democracy from the ground up. I want to thank Heather for joining us today and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go find some way to help. Money, time, word of mouth. You can even just share this podcast and start a conversation. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.